joined by Jim Cramer.
The Street är en finansiell nyhetskanal på nätet med stort fokus mot aktiemarknaden. Det här är den karismatiske grundaren Jim Cramer. Han figurerar på en rad tv-kanaler men är kanske mest känd för sin show Mad Money på CNBC.
Here with Jim Cramer on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
EFN tog sig till Wall Street i New York för att prata med hans programledarkollega Rhonda Schaffler.
So what's your opinion right now about the stock market?
We have seen such volatility since the start of the year. It's been very interesting, and one thing I can tell you is every time there's volatility in the market, everyone forgets that it's supposed to do that. So investors get very nervous about it, but there is some concern about growth, not just globally, but in the US. So some of that nervousness is justified because people are trying to figure out, will the economy continue to grow at current levels? So it's tricky, it's messy to watch, it's interesting to cover. Nobody is saying that the market is so undervalued right now that people should rush in to buy. So people are really trying to assess if the market is telling us that the economy is going to slow down in the future.
You meet a lot of companies. What impression do you get from the companies? Are they worried or?
You know, a lot of the companies, the executives, when you talk to them, will say things like, we can't control what's going on in the economy, we can only control our own business. But companies have been impacted in the last quarterly earnings reporting season by the stronger dollar. That has hurt them. We see pockets of weakness reported, say, in Europe that might filter back to a company's business. In the US, the oil and gas companies have very much suffered. They've had a lot of layoffs. They're trying to issue equity to have cash flow. So sometimes you understand more of what an executive is thinking about by watching what they're doing with their own company.
What do you think their biggest concerns are right now? Is it the oil price? Is it China? Is it...
The China slowdown has been a theme for quite some time, and it is mentioned, although other people poo-poo that and say, listen, the economy in China is still growing quite a bit, just not at the level. So yes, that is a worry. People are worried about the Federal Reserve. They're worried about the election cycle. Warren Buffett, who is one of the most famous investors in the U.S., commented about the negativity in the U.S. presidential cycle right now, just a few days ago. So that's a worry. And it's always growing their business and trying to be more efficient. And companies have become, they say, lean and mean, and they mean it over the last couple of years. So it's really trying to stay ahead of whatever economic headwinds there are.
Mm. So if we look at the American companies, how are they doing? If we look at technology, finance, healthcare,
healthcare has actually been a very strong growth area because President Obama changed healthcare legislation a few years ago, and healthcare companies have been able to grow from that. Technology is interesting. You know, a lot of times it's ups and downs, and the growth isn't where analysts thought, so we see their stocks sell off. So it's very much mixed sector to sector. Oil and gas, I mentioned, that's struggling. The financial sector, there's some worries there about a slowdown in economy. So it's a very mixed picture, I will say, and everyone's got their own set of difficulties.
What kind of stocks do you think is coming? Which are the winners?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, I can tell you what other people say in terms of the people I talk to. A lot of people say dividends are increasingly important now, companies that pay dividends, especially if the economy slows down. A lot of people think the stock market won't do as well this year as in years past. By that, it might still be up, but only by a few percent. So in that kind of environment, you look for companies that pay dividends. And I think it's interesting, you know, every industry has got a growth story. It's just figuring out which company is the one that's really beating the competition, and that changes a lot.
Yeah. And what area in the world do you think is coming? Or not to go to?
Well, I mean, there's still a lot of caution about Latin America. Others, you know, Argentina's stock market has done amazing since the start of the year because they had a presidential election. But there's some concerns still about Brazil. Some of the BRIC economies, the emerging markets, but that's also where the opportunity is too. One area I'm interested in that's very hard to trade in is frontier markets, and those are the little baby markets that are developing around the world. They're not yet emerging markets. There's a lot of frontier markets in Africa, for instance. Those are the kind of stories I would love to talk about all day long, because there will be great successes eventually in some of those areas. Yeah. You know, we're very US-centric. I hate to admit, our investors do like the US companies, and kind of even writing about a company that's international involves more explaining, because there's so many stocks to invest in here in the US.
Yeah. Beyond that, Jim, is what's happening with the stock price, and it's not having a good year at all.
Is that more of a story about the stock itself or its business?
How do you respond to the current, the upcoming election?
The election's interesting. A lot of people criticize the US political cycles being too long, and in the US a lot of people also agree it's too long.
What do you think?
I think it is too long. I mean, it's long and it's expensive, and you know, Canada to the north of us elects leaders in just a couple of months, so it can be done in a much quicker cycle. Whatever happens is very important for investors, for businesses, so people pay attention. I think always in America people are frustrated that there's less talk about issues often and more talk about personalities, and that's just a problem with our system. But people want to know the issues here, and we certainly see on Wall Street concerns always about regulation. For investors, there's always concerns about will their Social Security, which is the income we get after we retire, will there be money for me when I retire? Those are recurring themes that really every presidential cycle, it comes up in some way. So people are very concerned about what happens, and they want to know, of course, that their finances aren't going to be adversely impacted.
How do you think it will be? What will happen if Bernie Sanders gets elected, or Donald Trump or Hillary? Can you guide me through?
I will say this, that, I mean, Hillary Clinton has come out and said a few things, for instance, about drug pricing and pharmaceutical companies. So investors have sold healthcare stocks. They're worried there will be changes there. Donald Trump has said things about immigration that might impact the workforce. But what is said during the campaign trail doesn't always translate into action in the US. We have a Congress that's divided. Both parties have to work with each other. They haven't done a lot of that in the last couple of years, and it's been hard for legislation to get through. We've had big legislation, Obama's Affordable Care Act, we had the Dodd-Frank regulation. It took forever to get those things through. So we move at a slow pace sometimes with these regulations that change entire industries.
Okay, thank you for taking time to talk to me.
It was so nice speaking with you.